with the RAF and the Royal Navy through the Second World War as well.
And we can add to that, of course, that in the last 50 years, when, thank God, we haven't had such a price to pay in terms of lives, New Zealand servicemen and women have been all over the world, wherever peacekeeping had to be done, serving us, representing us in the uttermost parts of the earth.
And he has, in 3 days, travelled from the uttermost ends of the earth. An extraordinary journey, quite different to the one he made on a ship that took weeks, those 88 years ago. He's come home in 3 days by jet plane.
Colonel Wagg will be conducting the service in the cathedral and will, of course, in 3 hours or so, be uttering those final words of committal when the unknown warrior is placed in the tomb at the other end of Wellington. So things in the cathedral and final preparations moving ahead as the canon conducts Prime Minister Helen Clark. For whom this is a very special day. Her family gave a great deal in World War I. We might find out more about that later when we meet her parents. She joins the Speaker of the House, Right Honourable Jonathan Hunt, and all the other ministers of the Crown sitting in the front of the cathedral. And very shortly, the Governor-General, Dame Sylvia Cartwright, and Peter Cartwright will be arriving at the cathedral. We'll hear the fanfare to let us know that they are there, and it will then be the signal for the escort to move round into Molesworth Street, then into Hill Street, and to make their way into the cathedral. Governor-General approaching now. And in her party will be a very important guest here today, Sir John Wilsey. Sir John is Deputy Chair of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And I know Alison will be talking later about how the people of France have, in a way, handed our son back to us to be brought home. But there's also a very important handover taking place in that the Commonwealth War Graves Commission has taken charge, taken care, and cared wonderfully for all those New Zealand soldiers who lie in their graves in France and in other parts of Europe.
Yes, anyone who's been to those cemeteries anywhere in the world, and they really are scattered far and wide, will marvel at the work done by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. All of those cemeteries are pristine. The headstones are pure white. The lawns are beautifully mowed. The trees are well kept. It's a tremendous tribute to the work of those people.
And don't those medals, whether they are pinned onto perhaps rarely worn suit jackets or onto uniforms, very much tell their own story, a story of service, perhaps exemplified as much by this man as by any other. Alan Johnston, former president of the RSA, now in a wheelchair. You probably remember him if you joined us on previous Anzac Day ceremonials, because it was Alan who would deliver the Ode to the Fallen, a powerful presence and a wonderful guardian of the memory and carer for all those who returned. Immediately behind the Principal Defence Chaplain is Mr. John Duncan, who's President of the Federation of Funeral Directors of New Zealand. Had a very major part to play, obviously. They have provided the casket, and we'll be not seeing much of that until we actually arrive at the National War Memorial, because the New Zealand ensign will be over it. But it is a beautifully made casket, and the man who made it, Bob Jones, down in Greymouth on the west coast, must be feeling very proud today. And Alison was there when, was it Alison, that casket was sealed?
It was the very small copper box which is inside the casket. I guess it's only about 2/3 of the length of that casket, in which our unknown soldier lies. The casket was sealed at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission base in Arras in France, very close to the Somme. And it was sealed with wax and then placed inside the main casket.
Now here's the Governor-General and Peter Cartwright being led into the cathedral by Dean Frank Nelson. We will hear later on a eulogy from the Governor-General, but what she will do in the cathedral, which will be very moving, is read that letter from Colonel Malone.
It's worth noting now that these men carrying the casket were the very first men who received him from the French when he was handed over at the small memorial in Longueval, right in the middle of the Somme, where this man would have fallen. So these men have travelled from France too. It's their job to carry the warrior all the way from France to his final resting place today at the National War Memorial. A job they're very proud to be doing.
That's true, Alison. You can sense it with all the armed forces, and we've had a good deal to do with them as the preparations have gone ahead here. Huge pride in recollection and in the symbolism of this, and just things that they take for granted that we don't. Like they say, well, of course, the casket will never be without an escort.
Exactly, and he wasn't
Never.
left. He wasn't left even in the plane when we were overnighting and getting some rest. He was accompanied.
Like all the Defence Force involvement with today, it's tri-service, warrant officers carrying the casket from Royal New Zealand Navy, from the Army and the Royal New Zealand Air Force. And I suppose it's at times like this that if you like, they pull rank. And it's the senior service, the Royal New Zealand Navy. Although in some ways, they are the junior service in our country, but that tradition carries through, so they lead.
I think the wonderful thing about all of this, right from the time the troops went to France, is that each of the services, the combined Defence Force of New Zealand, have been equally represented, Army, Navy, Air Force, and they've seen it, they have really united in this task and felt tremendous pride and ownership of our boy. And of course, because more than 2/3 of them, I think it is, have actually all themselves served in, been deployed in conflict areas, they have an affinity with this soldier. The muted drum there that's been playing from the time the warrior was received in France.
the unknown warrior enters the Cathedral of St. Paul for the commemoration service to the sound of Saint-Saëns' Marche Héroïque, the March of the Hero. In the background there, the Anglican Bishop of Wellington, Bishop Tom Brown, also Bishop to the Defence Forces. As the escort with wonderful precision. Such concentration, such love and dedication. Gently lower the casket to the catafalque on the floor of the chancel of this great cathedral.
And I can promise you that for these men, this is a task done with love. They really care, these 6 men.
We were talking earlier on about how this cathedral is the right place for this ceremonial. And that's underlined by what I hope we'll see as the service goes on, which will be some coloured daylight, which will play over the casket from those windows that you can see just above the choir on either side. They are memorial windows, built, erected to the memory of all people who have served in the New Zealand Army, in the Royal New Zealand Air Force, in the RAF, in the Royal Navy, in the Royal New Zealand Navy, and in the Merchant Navy. The medals that have accompanied him placed on the casket. Three of those medals are essentially British medals awarded for service in World War I, then a medal for service in World War II, and the New Zealand Operational Service Medal, which is awarded to all those who've served in any conflict or operation since 1945. Nothing is known about this warrior except that he was a New Zealander who died in France in the First World War. And so today's service will encompass all the faiths and beliefs of our nation, because he represents everyone in the nation. And alongside him in the choir stalls are those who will utter the blessings before he leaves the cathedral. A time for reflection now as we approach the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month and the 2-minute silence of remembrance.